The whistle screamed like a dying hawk, and the ground trembled beneath the iron beast. Steam hissed, rolling white across the depot boards, swallowing boots and skirts in a restless fog. Horses stamped and shied, their reins pulled tight by ranch hands with hats low against the sun. Dust rose with every shift of hooves, hanging in the air as though even the wind held its breath. Jonas Hale stood still, boots planted firm, his shadow stretching long across the planks. His hat brim cut a hard line over his eyes, but nothing shielded him from what he saw when the train clattered to its halt. Iron couplings groaned, pistons hissed, and the hiss gave way to silence, so sudden it seemed the whole frontier paused. Doors opened. Passengers spilled out, farm wives clutching children, miners with soot in their lungs, drifters with hunger in their eyes. And then, her. She stepped down slow, her gloved hand resting on the rail as though it steadied more than her body. A plain dress of traveling cloth brushed the dust, hem frayed from miles unseen. She carried no fanfare, no greeting smile, just a single battered trunk and a look that belonged to someone walking out of the grave. Jonas felt his throat dry, felt the world narrow until it was only her face. The same curve of jaw he remembered beneath the church eaves all those years ago. The same brown hair catching fire under the sun. But older now, worn by years he could not name. Still alive. Clara, the word slipped, too soft to be heard. Yet his lips formed it as if they remembered what his heart had tried to forget. A boy ran past with a sack of mail, shouting about letters from back east. A preacher's wife fussed at her bonnet string. Boots clattered on the boards. Wagons rattled off down the road. All of it blurred against the sight of her. She did not look at him, not at first. She pressed her trunk against the ground and scanned the faces gathered. A moment's pause. Then her gaze caught him, straight, sharp as a knife, and the years fell away in one cut. Recognition flickered. Not joy, not even relief. Something harder, something like the edge of a secret. Jonas shifted, the leather of his holster creaking with the movement. He had not worn the Colt for ceremony. He wore it because habit never left a man who once drew faster than another breathed. His fingers brushed the worn wood, not for violence, but because her eyes brought the past rushing in like floodwater, and he needed something solid to hold. The depot's telegraph clacked from inside the station. A dog barked down the road. Old men leaning against the hitch rail muttered, "Sometimes the dead don't stay buried." Clara lifted her chin, her gloved hand tightening on the handle of her trunk. A small shape pressed beneath her traveling coat shifted when she moved, as though something more than cloth lay hidden close to her chest. She stepped forward, and the crowd parted without asking why. Jonas's boots carried him 2 paces nearer before he realized it. His heart thundered, but his voice came low, steady. "You." Her breath caught, only for a second. Then she spoke, quiet but sharp enough to carry. Jonas Hale. The name hung in the hot air, stirring memories of dust roads where 2 children once raced, of a churchyard kiss stolen beneath candle smoke, of a promise never spoken before she vanished into the colliery years. He remembered the day they told him she was gone. He remembered breaking his father's plow in rage, remembered whiskey bottles smashed against the barn. And now, she stood alive before him. But this was no reunion, no tender miracle. He saw it in her eyes, fear shadowed behind them, not the kind born of seeing him, but of being seen by others. She scanned the depot again, too sharp, too wary. She was not running to him. She was running for something else. Jonas bent slightly, his voice meant only for her. "You shouldn't be here." Her answer was a whisper wrapped in steel. "I didn't have anywhere else left." The wind shifted, lifting the dust into spirals between them. Somewhere down the line, a horse snorted and a saddle creaked. The depot boards moaned under shifting weight. But no sound was louder than the silence after her words. He reached for her trunk. She didn't stop him, but her hand lingered over the lid, as though guarding what lay inside. It was light, too light for a life's worth of belongings. Jonas frowned, but said nothing. As they turned, whispers followed. Town women murmured about how mail-order brides came desperate these days, Men traded coins on how long she'd last on a rancher's spread. But Jonas knew better. He felt it in the way her shoulders tensed. She hadn't come west to find a husband. She'd come because she carried something, and someone would surely come looking. The sun bore down, flattening every shadow, sharpening every edge. Jonas led her across the boards toward the waiting wagon. She kept her coat close, eyes sweeping the crowd like a hawk measuring distance to prey. And though no gun was drawn, though no fight had yet begun, Jonas felt the same heaviness in the air he'd felt on the edge of gunfights years ago. The moment before lightning strikes, when the earth itself seems to wait. At the step of the wagon, she paused, turned to him fully for the first time. "Why did you come?" she asked. Jonas looked at her, eyes hard beneath the brim. His voice came rough, carrying the weight of years and dust. "Because I was expecting a stranger, not the ghost of my first kiss." Her breath shivered just once. Then the walls returned to her face. She climbed into the wagon, trunk against her knees, coat still tight. Jonas took the reins. The depot faded behind them, but the whispers clung. Steam from the train drifted high into the sky, dissolving into nothing, but Jonas knew what he'd seen would not dissolve. Clara Wynn had returned from the grave, and the grave was never empty without reason. And as the wagon rolled down the sun-scorched road, a shadow rode with them, unseen but certain, carried on the silence of the desert. Lantern light flickered across rough-hewn beams, throwing shadows that bent and swayed with every gust through the cracks of the ranch house walls. Clara stood at the hearth, stirring beans with a wooden spoon, though her hand shook so faintly the light betrayed it. Jonas watched from the table, elbows braced, his plate empty though supper had been late an hour. The silence between them creaked, louder than the boards beneath their boots. "You ain't touched yours," she said without looking up. Jonas's gaze narrowed on the small trunk tucked against the far wall, its brass corners dulled, leather strap worn thin. He hadn't seen her let out of her sight since the depot. "I will." The wind beat against the shutters, and the coyotes howled in answer. Clara flinched. Her spoon clattered against the pot, ringing sharp as gunmetal. "You're waiting for something," Jonas said, his voice low, heavy. Clara froze, then set the spoon down slow. She faced him at last, her eyes catching the lantern flame. They weren't the eyes of the girl he'd kissed once. They were the eyes of a woman who'd buried too much. "They'll come," she whispered. Jonas leaned forward, the chair groaning beneath his weight. "Boo!" She drew the coat tighter around her frame, though no chill rode the room. Her hand touched near her chest, fingers brushing against what was hidden beneath. "The men who took my husband, the men who burned my life to the ground, they know what I carry." Jonas's hand flexed on the table. The words cracked through him like a whip. "Husband." Her throat worked hard, but she didn't back down. "Sheriff Wynn, shot in the street like a dog. I buried him myself, but I took something before they could bury him proper." She moved to the trunk, knelt, and pulled it open. Inside lay only folded cloth, a book bound in leather, and a revolver with its steel dulled from long use. She lifted the book, heavy, swollen with ink. The sheriff's journal. Jonas's jaw tightened. "Names," she said, opening to pages scrawled with lines of crooked handwriting. "Every man who paid coin to the gang. Every lawman who looked away. Every deal struck in back rooms while good folk bled in the streets. My husband wrote it all, and when he died, I swore I'd carry it west. But they followed me. They always follow." The lantern flame sputtered in the draft. Jonas felt the old weight pressing against his ribs, the kind he hadn't felt since his youth with a gun in his hand, the kind that whispered of blood and duty. Outside, the dogs barked sharp and sudden. Both of them froze. Jonas stood, his chair scraping across the floor. He stepped to the window, pushed the curtain aside just enough to see. A rider's silhouette lingered down the trail, too far to mark a face, too still to be passing through. Watching. Clara's voice was barely air. "They found me." Jonas let the curtain fall. He turned to her, the years of dust in his chest rising. "Then you best stop stirring beans and start loading iron." She hesitated only a heartbeat, then drew the revolver from the trunk. Her hands weren't the clumsy hands of someone new to it, They were steady, practiced, like grief had carved the fear out of her. The scrape of steel sliding into her palm brought Jonas a memory of his own. A younger man's hands, sure and quick, drawing faster than anyone west of the Mississippi. A name whispered in saloons, Iron Hand Hale. He thought he'd buried that name beneath cattle and fences. But now, with Clara back from the grave and shadows at the door, the iron stirred again. He stepped closer, his voice low. "How many?" "6 rode down on my town," she said, loading rounds one by one. "Could be more now. They hunt like wolves." Jonas nodded once, his jaw set like stone. "Then they'll learn wolves bleed." The dogs barked again, closer this time. Hooves shifted in the night, faint but certain. Clara's hand trembled just once, then steadied as she snapped the revolver shut. She met his eyes, no longer hiding, no longer running. "I didn't come here for a husband, Jonas. I came here for a fight." The lantern flared in the draft, shadows leaping high, and the silence between them broke. Not with words, but with the weight of the truth laid bare. Outside, the night thickened, and with it came the certainty that dawn would not rise quiet. The saloon doors swung wide, and dust drifted in with the men who carried it. Spurs struck the floorboards like hammers, their weight heavy, their laughter low and sharp as broken glass. Eyes turned from card tables and whiskey glasses, but no one dared hold the gaze for long. The gang had arrived. 6 of them, maybe more outside. Faces weathered, mouths split with scars, pistols riding their hips like old friends. The tallest among them, broad-shouldered, coat hanging loose, slammed his hand on the bar and ordered whiskey enough to drown a steer. But it wasn't thirst that brought them west. Their eyes hunted the corners, searching faces, peeling back silence until the room seemed ready to split. "Wynn," the name rasped from the leader's throat. Not shouted, spoken calm, like a knife pressed slow into flesh. "We're looking for the widow Wynn." Chairs scraped. A drunk stumbled toward the door, but thought better of it when a revolver tilted his way. The piano player's fingers froze on the keys, one note hanging sour in the air. No one answered. No one ever did when the wolves came sniffing. Across town, Jonas Hale sat on the porch of the ranch house, rifle laid across his knees. The moon hung high, spilling pale light across the dry earth, and every sound reached him. Coyotes on the ridge, the clatter of horses in the livery, the faint echo of laughter rolling from the saloon. But what tightened his grip was not sound. It was knowing. He had lived long enough to feel when trouble rode in. Behind him, through the thin walls, Clara moved. The floor creaked beneath her boots as she paced, revolver in hand. Jonas hadn't seen her sleep in days. She watched the road as he did, shoulders tight, eyes dark as burned-out coals. "You hear it too," she said. Jonas didn't turn. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon where lanterns bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps along the road into town. "There are skin questions. Then they'll find me," she whispered. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, coiled alive. Jonas shifted the rifle, thumb brushing the worn metal, and the memory of old nights came back. Nights where he was not Jonas the rancher, but Iron Hand Hale, the man who never missed. A name buried deep, clawing its way back with every shadow that drew near. The wind stirred, carrying faint hoofbeats. Jonas rose, slow, measured, as if the night itself might break if he moved too quick. He stepped to the edge of the porch, boots heavy on the wood, and stared into the dark. "They'll be here before long." Clara joined him, the revolver steady at her side. She looked down the road, her jaw set hard. "Then let them come." Back at the saloon, the leader of the gang swirled whiskey in his glass, eyes never leaving the room. His men spread wide, filling corners, leaning against walls, hands never far from iron. The silence was brittle, ready to snap. One of the locals, a wiry man with fear in his voice, finally spoke. "Ain't no widows here, stranger. You best ride on." Laughter rolled cold and mean. The leader leaned in close, his voice low, words dripping like venom. "She's here. Maybe not in this room, maybe not tonight. But she's west of the river. Carry in what don't belong to her. And we'll have it back, one way or another." He tossed a coin on the bar. It spun, rang, and settled, the silence swallowing a whole. Then he rose, and his men followed, spurs clinking in unison. They left the saloon as sudden as they'd entered, shadows spilling into the street with them. The door swung shut, but the fear they left behind stayed hanging in the smoke. At the ranch, the night deepened. Jonas set another lamp burning in the window, a beacon in the black. Clara leaned against the rail, her shoulders tight. "You ever wonder," she said, voice brittle, "why they're so afraid of words in a book? All the killing, all the chasing, just for names in ink." Jonas didn't answer at first. He watched the stars wheel slow above the desert, the same stars he'd looked at when he buried his first wife, when he thought Clara had died long ago, when he tried to leave the gun behind. Finally, he said, "Because words live longer than bullets." The hoofbeats grew louder. Clara straightened, revolver rising slightly in her hand. Jonas's eyes hardened, and for the first time in years, the old fire kindled in his chest. He turned to her, his voice steady. "Tomorrow, the whole town will know they're here. And tomorrow, we choose, run or stand." Clara looked back, and in her eyes was no fear, only the burn of something deeper. "I've run long enough." The dogs barked then, sharp, furious. Lanterns flared in the distance, bouncing with the rhythm of horses. Jonas raised a rifle to his shoulder, the iron cool against his cheek, and the past he thought he'd buried rose up in full. The night held its breath, and the wolves drew near. Dawn bled red across the horizon, the sky torn open like a wound. Dust rolled down Main Street, curling low between the shuttered windows and sagging awnings. The town was hushed, as if every soul held its breath, waiting for the storm. Jonas Hale stepped into the street, boots sinking into the powder of yesterday's tracks. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, rifle loose in his hands, the weight of it familiar again after years of silence. At his side walked Clara Wynn, her revolver at her hip, her coat pulled tight against the morning chill. The journal lay hidden in her satchel, the words inside heavier than any bullet. From the depot, spurs clinked, steady and cruel. The outlaw gang spilled into the open, their silhouettes cut sharp against the rising sun. 6 men fanned wide, pistols already drawn, their leader grinning beneath a hat pulled low. "Thought you could run, widow," he called, his voice carrying over the stillness. "Thought you could hide with an old rancher. But we always find what belongs to us." Clara's breath curled in the morning air, but her hands did not tremble. She lifted the revolver, cocked the hammer back with a click that cracked like thunder in the silence. "It never belonged to you," she said. The gang laughed, a cruel sound that echoed down the empty street. But Jonas didn't laugh. He stepped forward, steady, his rifle rising. The townsfolk peeked from windows, from behind doors, eyes wide, whispers running like wildfire. Iron Hand Hale. The leader's grin faltered. He knew the name, and then the silence broke. The first shot cracked the air, echoing like a whip across the canyon walls. Jonas's bullet struck true, the leader's hat spinning off his head as he staggered, blood painting his coat. Clara fired next, her revolver flashing bright in the morning, dropping the second man before he could clear his gun. The street erupted in thunder. Bullets screamed, wood splintered, glass shattered. Smoke poured thick, curling around them in ghostly veils. Jonas moved like a man reborn, iron steady in his hands, each shot measured final. Clara matched him, her aim unshaken, her breath even as if the years of fear had burned clean away. One outlaw fell into the dust, clawing at his chest. Another spun with a scream, dropping his pistol as he collapsed. The leader, wounded but not down, roared and charged, firing wild. A shot caught Jonas in the shoulder, spinning him back against the trough. He gritted his teeth, blood staining his shirt, but his rifle did not fall. Clara's cry tore through the smoke. She fired again, her bullet catching the leader square in the heart. He stumbled, eyes wide with shock, before crashing face first into the dust. The silence that followed rang louder than the gunfire. The last outlaw turned to flee, spurred boots pounding. Jonas, pale with pain, lifted his rifle one final time. The shot cracked, clean and sure, and the man dropped before he reached the end of the street. When the smoke cleared, only Jonas and Clara still stood. Dust swirled around their boots, settling slow as if reluctant to fall. Jonas leaned heavy on the rifle, his breath ragged, blood dark on his shirt. Clara stepped close, slipping her arm beneath his, holding him upright with strength no one had expected from a widow in mourning. The townsfolk poured out now, their whispers swelling into a roar. They gathered around the fallen outlaws, eyes wide, voices trembling. They had seen the widow's fire, seen the rancher's iron, seen justice written in smoke and blood. An old man at the edge of the crowd raised his hat, his voice carrying, "Iron Hand Hale rides again." But Jonas shook his head, his voice rough. "Not me. Not today." He looked at Clara, her revolver still hot in her hand, her eyes burning steady as the rising sun. It was her. The people stared at her then, not as a stranger, not as a frightened widow, but as the one who had stood when all others hid. A woman who carried a dead man's words and made them thunder louder than any gun. Clara met their eyes, silent, and holstered the revolver with hands that did not shake. The gang lay broken in the dust. The journal remained in her satchel, names inked bold, ready to burn the rot from every corner of the territory. But it was not the book that people would remember. It was the sight of the widow in the dawn light, revolver smoking, standing unbroken beside the rancher who had once loved her, who still did. And so the tale spread, across saloons, across campfires, across the endless miles of desert where stories rode faster than horses. They said the cowboy stood in shock at the depot when he saw the girl who had once been his first kiss. They said she carried death in her satchel and fire in her eyes. They said the outlaws bled out in the dust, and justice walked tall that day. And the storytellers always ended it the same. It was not the gunman folk remembered, nor the rifle he carried. It was the widow, Clara Wynn, who proved the strongest steel is not forged in iron, but in grief and in love that refuses to die.